Good morning, Scott here, known as Cantaloupe to some online, and I'm bringing a video to you on a subject that's interesting to me. It might be of interest to you or someone you know, and I want to get this on record while I can because it is, as far as I'm concerned, in my lifetime, one of the biggest, most profound observations that I've had, if I've ever been profound. Not that that's the goal, but this one, I believe, can shape our world in a very serious and important way that people have consistently overlooked. I have not ever heard this idea expressed concisely in my entire life, and it solves so many problems. There is a misconception, a wild misunderstanding, tragic and devastating confusion about the law, all caps, the law. There are ideas going around that things are illegal out of context, that no one is above the law out of context. And I want to clarify something that, yes, you're right, given a context. There has to be a context. So this is where it gets tricky. It's very difficult for people to understand this, where people are different, first of all. That should be obvious. We don't look the same. We don't have the same bank balance. We don't have the same aptitudes or potentials. We aren't born into the same families with the same opportunities. Every single person is different. So right off the bat, there's a question about equality, right? So we hear a lot of rhetoric about being born equal, and this is kind of the start of it. What does that mean if we're not equal? Okay, well, what it means is that in fairness, people should have access to equal opportunities, right? In fairness, that's a little bit different. So when you leave words out, you can really change the meaning of a statement or a question. Absolutely, you can. It's important to be clear, but I think that this original spirit of all men are born equal was supposed to include all citizens, all women. I mean, at the time, yes, there was a lot of segregation and discrimination, and there continues to be, but the people who actually wrote this down understood the principle behind it, and they weren't necessarily speaking for all the people who have reinterpreted it since then, who have said it wrongly and who have behaved badly. All men are created equal means that it's not okay to be on the offense. There's a difference between offense and defense. All these ideas are connected. So there is a difference between having an offensive strategy, such as in military warfare, versus having a defensive strategy, such as in peacetime. There's a very big difference. One of these is justifiable. It's always justifiable to defend yourself legitimately when called for, right? So here's a clue. There are a lot of clues, and I'm going to circle back to my original comment. To defend yourself when called for, when justified, is okay. Obviously, it's not a crime to do that. So to say that nobody is above the law, when a law as a symbol out of context can fit someone defending themselves legitimately, creates a logical problem, doesn't it? Suddenly you are acting contrary to justice by saying something simply like nobody is above the law. Well, if somebody has to do something to defend themselves, which happens to violate a rule in the process of doing so, you have a problem. So, okay, I don't want to make this complicated. It's not complicated. My point is that there is a very elegant, very simple solution, a simple clarification that helps understand what is proper, when it is proper, and how all of these spirits of wisdom can make sense, because they do. But people misunderstand them. They misrepresent them. So it starts with understanding equality. People are not the same. It means equal opportunity. Don't forget that second part. The second word makes a lot of difference. So, and then what is a crime? Let's talk about that. What is an actual crime? You have to get down to a very specific understanding and definition of what crime is. And it's not just when a law fits a behavior or decision. This is where we all have gone wildly off the rails. You can fit laws to good behavior, and here's your problem. So a crime, it turns out, is when you have damage outside of consent, legitimate consent. You have damage, that means there's a problem, an actual problem. Once substantiated, investigated, and prosecuted, it turns out that it was outside of an agreement. Now, it doesn't have to have been on purpose or on accident necessarily. It can be, I mean, we want provision for recklessness, right? We want provision for people having inexperience, but we also definitely want to provide for when people are acting malicious, when people are doing it on purpose, they know it's wrong and they do it anyway. That's obviously a crime, but I'm not saying that intentions are everything. I want to keep this clear and short. I'm not saying that just because you didn't mean to commit a crime, there was no crime. I'm not saying that. It's still a crime if you accidentally damage someone's stuff. You might get a more lenient sentence if it's prosecuted, but you should probably answer for that. You definitely should if the victim was harmed and wishes to press charges. Okay, so there has to be an avenue for that, and I'm providing for that by saying if there was no contract, if it was not agreed to beforehand or afterwards or whenever, if there was no agreement and there was a substantial problem that either trespassed, caused bodily harm or property harm or psychological harm, which is a thing. It can be a thing. It can be a very real thing. Psychological or emotional trauma is potentially a real thing. It's not every time, no, but the point here is that crime, by definition, is damage outside of an agreement. So, starting with this understanding, you can then look at the rules, and for comments like such and such is illegal, and I say this myself, but I say it with the understanding that a context must exist where damage has occurred outside of an agreement. So to say that something is illegal, that is always illegal. It's illegal to kill people. Okay, this is a great example. Well, what do our soldiers do overseas? What do our soldiers do sometimes here domestically? What do police do sometimes out of necessity? Okay, to say that killing is wrong, no, all right, well, it comes down to the circumstances, the actual situation, the context, again, every single time. The spirit behind it, the outcome, and the actual relevant details. And this is why, connected, we have courtrooms. Okay, some of this should be obvious. I don't want to overstate the obvious here, but we have courtrooms and investigatory procedures so that we can establish whether something happened outside of an agreement, whether or not there was even a problem, and who did it. If there are multiple accusations or conflicting or confusing accusations, they have time to go over the evidence and, if necessary, make a decision. That is to make a judgment, right? We call them judges. Historically, before we had juries, we just had judges. So, not to digress too far. So, crime, to review one last time: damage outside of an agreement. Equality means nothing outside of opportunity. And to say that no one is above the law presupposes that there has been damage, presupposes that it was outside of an agreement, and that somebody has a complaint about it. Maybe you've heard the expression, there are no victimless crimes. Something to think about. There are no victimless crimes. Why is that? Because in order for something to be criminal, there has to have been a victim of some kind. Otherwise, you're working contrary to justice at that point. If you look at it, you are doing anti-justice. You are undermining the system's integrity. You are abusing, potentially, the power of the system and its authorities to pursue or prosecute a victimless crime. To uphold the rules just for the sake of upholding the rules, regardless of context, regardless of whether or not there has been damage of any kind, whether or not there was an agreement. And this is the problem that we are all facing right now, that we are facing a widespread misunderstanding that is being forced upon us by our authorities, where you are being programmed to believe that the rules outside of context have some kind of meaning and power. There has to be a circumstance. There has to be a whole big picture. Without that picture, it's not even possible to have a crime. There has to have been damage. I'm going to say that for one last time at 10 minutes. Without damage, there's no crime. Reach out if you like with questions or comments to whitehotrobot@gmail.com. Thank you.